Do you remember the first time you picked up a camera?
I do. I have a little photograph of it, and it's me and Therese, who was a friend of my parents. And there's a picture of me with this. It's not a box brownie, but it's one level up from that. And you can see me kind of struggling with the controls. And I guess I must have been 3, something like that, you know. And then later on, I picked up my father's. He had this Kodak camera that had the bellows that opens up and the bellows stick out. And I did a lot of my early work with that camera.
And why not keep it as a hobby? How did you? So many kids pick up gadgets of all sorts. Why continue on?
I suppose it was kind of in the family because my father worked for the BBC. He was a drama producer, and he was one of the pioneers of 3-camera drama, and he produced about an hour of live television every week. And even though I could see the stress on his face, you know, it was definitely an area that I was going into. Some of my earliest memories of my father was he would come home and he would work at home, and he had a map of a plan view of the studio. And then, because the cameras they all had cables on them, he would have a piece of string on this like plastic representation of the camera, and where it plugged into the wall. And his job was to block the show without a camera ever running over another cable, because they were on wheels and they couldn't run over the cable. So that's like a very early memory of me and his workflow. But no, I only really ever wanted to be 2 things, and one was a film director and the other one was a rock and roll star. So
Right. And John Bonham was already
exactly. With the crowded profession.
You grew up in the United Kingdom?
I did. I was born in central London on the Tottenham Court Road, and I believe we spent our early years in Notting Hill Gate, and then we moved out to what was then the country, but it was really suburbia, to a place called Bushey Heath, which is near Watford, which is where Elton John owned his football team, so that gives you a reference. And it was also situated halfway between Elstree Studios and Pinewood Studios. So for me, it was a really good place to live because I could commute to either one of those studios. You know?
And then, at what point did you leave the UK?
Well, I got my dream job, which was to work for my favorite director ever, Stanley Kubrick, on a movie called 2001: A Space Odyssey. And that was when I was 19 years old. And so I worked for like 2.5 years on that movie, which is actually the longest gainful employment that I've ever had in my life, you know, in one stretch. And at the end of that movie, I was asked by Doug Trumbull, who had originally hired me onto that movie, to come and work for his new special effects company in California. So I came right after that movie in 1968. And really, I've been here ever since. So it's my country.
Sure. At that time, what was Kubrick's, he wouldn't have been a legend, of course, at that time, as he was in his 20s or early 30s himself?
He was, I'm not sure what age he was, but he was definitely a legend. My dad had taken me to see Paths of Glory, which was his first big picture, I think, with Kirk Douglas. And they had these wonderful tracking shots through the World War I trenches. And it was also a courtroom drama. So I think that was his, before that he had done The Killer's Kiss and The Killing, but they were smaller movies. So I think Powers of Glory was his first, really big movie. And then, he made movies like Lolita and Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying About the Bomb and Love It. I think that's the byline of the movie. No, he for me, and because my dad had taken me to see all these movies, and then some of them I went to on my own. He was a pretty big deal. He was my favorite director. So to get hired by him on that movie was, the stars must have aligned very carefully for me to get that opportunity. And I've had some really good breaks in my life, but I've always been ready for them. I'd always laid the groundwork. So when I got the call to work on that movie, I had a very strong training in animation. So I was hired as an animation artist, and then when they found out I could shoot animation, I became especially interesting to them because there's a process in animation where the animators animate, and then the animator, they write a dope sheet, which is an instruction sheet, to tell the cameraman how to shoot it. So it's like frame by frame. It tells the cameraman what to do. So I was able to do the artwork and then put it onto the camera, and I've skipped that dope sheet phase of the process. So I became very useful to them in that way, and that's how I got promoted very quickly.
Do you remember what it was like the first day you reported for the job?
Yeah, I was excited to be there, but I certainly wasn't nervous about it. It was, I think it's the arrogance of youth that you don't really know what you stepped into. And I felt very at home. I felt very supported by everybody that was around me. And, I had this background in animation. I had taught myself, I was a huge Disney fan as a kid. And when I was about 12, I wrote a book on how to animate cartoons, which was a focal press book. And I taught myself how to animate and to do cells. And then my dad bought me a 9.5 millimeter camera, which was able to take single frames. So now I was able to get my animated drawings and turn them into animated films. So I had done that. And then after school, I got hired by an animation company to be a trainee rostrum cameraman. A rostrum cameraman is the name of an animation photography process. So I had done that, and so I had this whole background that I'd been working on for years. So it seemed like I'd got this really lucky opportunity, and I jumped right into it. But I had this underlying base of knowledge and practical skill in that before I got there.
Do you remember your first meeting with Stanley Kubrick?
I do. Originally, when I came to work at MGM, we were in the front offices because the production hadn't really taken over the studio as it would within 6 months we were on every stage and every department. But at the moment that we were in this little tiny front office building, that had probably about 8 or 10 offices in it. And so I'd started off working in this room with Doug Trumbull, who had hired me, and another guy from the Film Board of Canada called Wally Gentleman. And there was Stanley just kind of like walking through the offices, and he seemed very relaxed. He was smiling and laughing and joking, and a very affable guy, and very personable. So he was, pleased to meet you, and it was. I remember it well. He came in with Arthur Clarke, who had written or co-written 2001 with him. He had written a short story that Stanley had based it on. And but yeah, they were just wandering through the office. There was no like formality to it, you know. It was just, it was very nice. And Stanley's office remained open throughout the production. So you could go into his office. He had a note on his wall saying "No half-baked ideas." You know, so you don't want to come in with anything that you haven't thought about and present to him that's not a formalized plan. You know, so very interesting guy. You know.
So really an open door policy, not just what some HR paperwork says.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. And you know he was. You know, he had some strange foibles to him. He liked to have nothing in his pockets. So I think he come in America. You have to carry your ID and your wallet and your car keys, and you know. So he had nothing on him. So he would bum cigarettes off other people, so he didn't have to have a pack of cigarettes on him. And he drove in this classic Rolls Royce that was at the studio, and he had a driver, but that was really the only kind of that you could call formal pretense or something that you know. And I have to say, I was a very irresponsible kid when I was on it, and I would frequently be late to work, so it would be like 9:30. And I'm coming into the parking lot, and the only other guy that's walking into the studio was Stanley, you know, and he never seemed to be angry with me for not being. So it was just like a nice, polite wave, and I'd go in. So, so it was weird because there wasn't really a pressure to work. The pressure of the work was on you, so. As so it seemed like I would come in and we'd look around and we'd talk about what we'd done the day before, and then it was tea time, and then we'd have tea, and then it seemed like nothing really got done before lunch, and then round about 3 o'clock I'd start really shooting in earnest, and by the end of the day I'd got more footage shot than anybody else that was doing the same kind of work, you know. So it was the arrogance of youth, but I guess with some talent, you know.
Did you have long hair?
I did. I
Nice.
did.
Nice.
I think that's another reason I was hired. You know, said, "Oh, he looks like the Beatles. You know, we should hire him." You know.
Were you well received being so young on the set, or were there other people that were 19, 20?
No, there weren't people as young as me. I was really the youngest around. And I was very well received in our little group, but I think a lot of people in the English film industry, it's a much more kind of closed and nepotistic loop, you know, than it is here. And that was one of the great things about coming to America, was that everybody was very open about everything and invested in your success. But there was always kind of like there was always a feeling like, oh, he's maybe a little too big for his britches, you know, over there. So some, you know, the people in our department were very enthusiastic and helpful, but others were a little like, what's he doing here? You know, that's, I'm not sure about that. You know.
Do you think that Stanley maybe saw a younger version of himself, sort of, just a sort of a free-spirited and maybe unintended, I don't know about the arrogance part, but just unintentional, sort of just idealistic, you know, free spirit?
Possibly. I never really saw it that way, you know. But I did, you know, because I idolized him so much. I had asked him. This was one of my last meetings with him on the movie. I said, "Well, where do you get where do you get your ideas for your movies from? Where do the and he said, well, that's a very good question, you know, and he had no answer for me.
So aside from him having this real open door policy, did you learn anything from how he dealt with people or how he worked? Maybe just him being open and relaxed and joking that you kind of wanted to emulate yourself?
I think probably my style of directing is similar to his in that way, except that I've never had the luxury of being able to be quite the perfectionist he was, because, you know, he was certainly known in his later movies for, I think Scatman Crothers or something did 70 odd takes of something in The Shining, you know, so he was known for shooting many versions of it, you know, and usually what I find, if I shoot a lot of takes, it's usually take one, or possibly the last take, but you know, I think the style of being relaxed on the set, you know, I've worked with some pretty heavy-duty directors that like to shout a lot and throw their weight around, and you know, to me, that's not the way to get the most out of a crew, you know.
How did you become the cinematographer on Tron?
I have no idea. I went for a meeting with the director Steve Lisberger at the Disney Studios. I'm not quite sure how I got that meeting or how it was set up, but I think it was from my other friends in the business that recommended me. But then I got into the office, and it was almost like I had the job before I even began the interview, you know. So I have no recollection of being interviewed for the job. It was just like, well, this is what we're doing, and you know, let's go. Let's get it together and do it, you know. So there wasn't much of an audition process there, but there again, at that movie, because of its technical challenges, there were they were, I don't think they were green lit totally when I took my meeting and got involved in it. So there were some screen tests and different proofs of concept that Disney wanted before the show moved forward. And so I was involved on those, and so, you know, slowly, you know, everything came together, and we got greenlit. This got greenlit, and that got greenlit, and then finally we were making the movie. You know, so it was a process.
How did it work with the cinematography and then the effects? Like, how was that, especially in the early '80s?
Well, there were three aspects of Tron. There was the live action, and then there was the CG animation, and the first CG animation ever used on a movie. And then there was stuff that was created to be in the cyberspace electronic world, footage that was based on live action. Now that live action was, you know, everybody was wearing like black and white suits, and it was shot in 70 millimeter, and they took every frame that we shot and they blew it up onto a 16-inch wide Codolith, and then those were put under the animation stand and shot with colored gels and diffusion filters. And so it became an animation process, and there were a lot of things that we had to do to make sure that when the black and white photography was blown up onto these high contrast cells, that they would work in the animation process. And mostly to do with having very, very sharp frames, because there's something called motion blur in photography, which is when something moves in front of a motion picture camera, things blur. And so, for instance, if they had a line on their suit and they were in motion, if that line wasn't perfectly sharp, it would just disappear from the Kodalith negative. So we had to have infinite depth of field. We had to have a very short shutter, which meant that every image was like perfectly sharp, you know, and all that required a tremendous amount of light, and the fastest film that we could use, and the fastest. The other thing, to create that depth of field, we needed to shoot at a very high aperture. You know, so a lot of the stuff was shot around f8 and f16, f11, which required a tremendous amount of light. And in fact, Burbank Water and Power called the studio twice during our production and said, "You're using too much electricity. We're going to shut you down if you don't use a little bit less." So,
oh wow,
we were welding with light on that movie, you know.
So they saw the usage from wherever they
absolutely
for the meter. Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Wow.
It peaked, and they could tell where it was coming from, you know. So.
How long was the actual shooting of the film? Not these other processes, but.
I think Tron. I think we shot for 69 days, and I think the regular live action schedule, because we shot up in Lawrence Livermore Labs up there at the Shiva laser lab, and then we shot sets on stage. So I think that was about 25 days, all that kind of live action. And the rest was this hybrid black and white photography that was later then going to be treated on the animation stand as special effects footage. You know?
Do you remember what it was like to see the premiere, to attend it?
The Tron premiere. No, I remember they had a black and white ball where I guess the women wore white and the men wore black, and it was at the Beverly Wilshire Hotel, and that was a pretty fun event. I don't remember the premiere of Tron. That's terrible.
Okay, well maybe it was a good night then.
Maybe a lot of people did. Yeah. No, because the story of Tron is strange because. You know, it was a picture that Disney had hyped a lot, and then somebody came out in the Wall Street Journal and said, "This is not the movie that's going to save the Disney studio," and their stock dropped like 2.25 points, and then there was the premiere of the movie, and 1 week later, E.T. came out. So it really kind of got eclipsed. And then somebody else at the studio said, "Okay, we don't want this, we want to take this out of distribution because we want to release the DVD at Christmas," you know. So when it came out, I don't think it wasn't really that successful, but after the summer, it started to pick up its own pace, you know, and then suddenly they cut it off to do DVD sales. So, but now it's a classic, so it doesn't really make any difference in there.
Were those the big video discs that you would kind of put in?
Laserdisc,
yes.
Yeah.
I remember.
Yeah.
Watched many movies.
But also videotape, I think, as well.
VHS.
Yeah, VHS tapes.
So how was that to probably be so thrilled to work on something that's groundbreaking? You put so many days in, almost 70 days of shooting time, and then additional in post or whatever. And then to have like a well-respected publication just come and just, for whatever the agenda, maybe there wasn't any, but just kind of crush it.
Well, it must have been a lot worse for Steven Lisberger than for me, you know, you know, my work had been over for a long time because obviously there was a live action schedule that I was involved in, but the whole post schedule was about a year. So we're talking about a project that I finished a year beforehand before it was premiered. So I do remember the first time I saw the movie was at the Chinese Theater on Hollywood Boulevard, and it was supposedly projected in 70 millimeter, and the projections had it out of focus for the whole show.
Oh, no.
And I was trying to go back and say, it's a lot sharper, it's a lot better than this, but that's something you get used to, is like your distribution of your product is not always at the quality that you shot the movie at. But now with digital, all that's kind of going away, and I think digital media is a lot more. I think it's a lot. The chances of you seeing the way it was shot are a lot better in the digital world than having a print at a road show at a theater, and with a projector bulb that the guy doesn't want to run it at full voltage because the bulb will last a little bit longer. So yes, I embrace the digital age.
When you booked your job on Star Wars, at that time, how big a deal was it? Was it similar to today booking a job on Avengers, or because it was a smaller movie, I think he was sharing the casting space with Brian De Palma, and they were making Carrie. They were kind of swapping actors. I don't know. Do you want this person? Oh, I'll take him. Yeah, okay. I like that Mark Hamill guy.
I hadn't heard that story.
Oh,
that's
okay.
Good. I like that.
Supposedly on the Carrie behind the scenes, they said that. Yeah. But how? Sorry. So how was that to work? Was it not a huge deal at that moment because we didn't know the effect of it, or?
Well, I had originally interviewed with George Lucas and Gary Kurtz to do the visual effects, to be the first unit visual effects director, and I spent a lot of time in my early career saying, "Oh, I've done that. I don't want to do that anymore. I'm going in this new direction." So I had been shooting as a live action DP a bunch of pictures for Roger Corman, and so that was the direction that my career was going. So my good friend John Dykstra got the job to do the main unit visual effects, and they invented this incredible motion control system which enabled you to shoot models moving very fast. In 2001 the spaceships were moving so slowly that you could just shoot them single frame and it was fine. But when you have a ship that's moving really fast, once again, the motion blur became really important. So that meant that you had to shoot the model while the camera and the model were in motion. So during the exposure, which might be as long as 4 seconds or something, the model was actually in motion and the camera was in motion at the same time. And that took the invention of motion control software, and it had never been used at this scale for so many shots before. So when George got back from shooting the live action in England, he walked into Industrial Light and Magic and said, "Well, where's the footage?" And they really hadn't shot any footage because they'd been developing this hardware software system, and so he got really frustrated. And he called me up to work on this little second unit, and he had this harebrained scheme where he wanted some puppeteers in black velvet suits, and he wanted to put the models on long black rods and puppeteer them in front of the lens so that they were, that the puppeteers were flying the. So it was kind of like a live action way of getting some of that model photography. Well, of course, that didn't work out at all. That was a really bad idea. But my unit then turned into this pyrotechnic unit. And there was this kid, Joe Viscosal, who made these really great little miniature bombs, and he was. So we started shooting these explosions, and we would shoot. I would look directly up at his explosions, so they would explode over the lens, and therefore give it the zero-G impression that it was happening in outer space. Because obviously, if you shoot an explosion normally, you get a big mushroom cloud, and it doesn't look like it's in outer space. So we started off letting these little bombs off, and it was quite successful, and shooting them with high-speed cameras. And then we got bigger and bigger, and we moved on to much bigger stages till eventually we had like a 40-foot blue screen, and we would drop the wire down in the middle of that blue screen, and we would light the blue screen with, like, I think there were 8 arc lamps, which were the most powerful lamps that you could get in those days, and shooting them with a VistaVision camera. And we would shoot up through a piece of glass, which were 2 sawhorses and a piece of plywood and a hole cut out to shoot through. And then a piece of glass was over that to protect the lens. And then we let off these bigger and bigger bombs until finally we had the explosions that we needed for blowing up the Death Star, and also for blowing up Alderaan. And I also shot a whole bunch of my friends at Industrial Light and Magic were making all these beautiful models, and I got to blow them up. So it was a fun little shoot.
And then the reception of the movie. Were you anticipating the reception, or were you surprised?
I was very surprised by the reception of the movie. I think we went to see it at the Academy Theater, and we said, "Hey, this is really nice." But then, like within a day or so, there were these long lines outside the movie, and it's kind of a trick that theater owners do. They like to keep their audience waiting on the street, so it looks like a hit movie. So everybody drives by and sees a line of people. But these were going around the block. So it was unlike 2001, which had this really kind of slow build. Star Wars was like a instant hit, and that summer. But then who knew it would grow into such a franchise, and it just went from strength to strength until it's, I guess, the world's biggest franchise right now.
Anything you observe with working with George Lucas in terms of how he worked with actors, his work ethic, that you felt you wanted to emulate as well?
George was very good to work with. He really knew what he wanted and where he was going with it, and he knew what he wanted you to do. So I really enjoyed the fact that he was so prepared. He also had a technique which we now call a rip-o-matic. And that technique was he got footage from old World War II movies like The Dam Busters and Tora, 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 and he basically cut his end action sequence out of footage from these World War II movies. And then that became a template for the effects, because you'd go to the cut and you'd say, okay, I need a ship moving from left to right and another one coming in this way, and it's going to be 17 frames long. So it was a way of, they have whole departments in movies now called previs for doing this kind of work now, but back then this was a technique I'd never seen before, and it worked really, really well.
When you were hired as a cinematographer on your first film, how prepared were you that first day?
I think the first live action film I shot was for a guy called Roy Cannon, who was Stanley Kubrick's prop master on 2001. And he had this little dark noir murder mystery that he wanted to shoot. So we shot in a 3-story walk-up in London. And you know, I have to say, ignorance or arrogance, I don't know which it was. You know, it's like I knew how to load an Ariflex, and I had a couple of sun guns, which are handheld lights, and I knew how to read an exposure meter, and I said, I can do this, you know? And so that was the first live action film I shot as a DP for somebody else. You know, I obviously shot stuff for myself for growing up, but you know, that was the first. So I was probably very unprepared, you know, but I seem to have a natural bent for it, you know. And then the next live action feature that I shot was for a friend that he was making kind of a music movie. And so it was it was a very bizarre, it was like a long music video. And I shot that, and I had a knack for moving people into lighting that was really good. So I don't think I used a light on that movie, but I was able to move the action of the movie into really great lighting situations and shoot with natural light. And everybody looked at the footage and say, hey, this is really great. It looks so natural and you know, alive, you know. And that's because it was, you know. So it wasn't until much later that I learned about lighting. And then I think as I learned about lighting, I think my work got worse. In terms of it had a very kind of lit look to it. And then once I'd mastered those tools, I was able to use those same tools to create very naturalistic lighting, but with artificial sources. So there was a progression there, but luckily I never screwed up bad enough not to get the next gig. So you know.
So the old saying, you need to know the rules before you can break them kind of thing applies to the lighting?
Yes, I think so. But also I think the lesson I learned that I tell people that ask me what they should do is, you know, should I get a job as a loader and then be an assistant cameraman and then be an operator and then be a DP? And my answer is that if you want to be a DP, that you go ahead and be a DP and start shooting, and you know, learn from what you see from your results, and you're probably going to find a level as you work your way up that you're good enough for a particular project, you know. But I think taking the bit by the horns and saying I'm going to do this job, and just try your hardest every opportunity that you get to shoot. Then that was my path, not the conventional path, you know.
At what point in your career and which project where you headed off to set and you realized, wow, this is I need to be really prepared. I can't mess up, and then it might have gotten in your head a little bit because the stakes were higher. You know, everybody kind of hopes to get to a certain point, and then there's a new problem of, wow, no, there's all this pressure on you.
Right. I think the most pressure I ever felt was I did a project called The Incredible Shrinking Woman, which was a movie with Lily Tomlin, and I decided to do all the visual effects. I was the visual effects director and the director of photography, and I decided to do all the effects as rear projection and front projection, which is a technique where you shoot the actors in front of live plates that are being projected. So once you send that film to the lab, you're done. There's no optical process, there's no post-process to that footage. And I was kind of out on a limb with that. So I was using equipment that hadn't been used for a long time, which was VistaVision rear projectors and front projection equipment. And I think there was a time when that process wasn't going really well, you know, and I felt that I felt scared that the process wasn't going to come together, you know, but it did. So it paid off, you know. But I think I don't think there's ever a day that I go to work. If I wake up for a shoot day and I'm not nervous, or I haven't had a shiftless night the night before, you know, then there's something wrong. I'm not doing my job, you know. So it's always been very stressful, because if you're not stressed, then I don't think you're doing your job, you know.
That's a great point, because I feel like now, especially in the kind of current state, there's like this "I got this" mentality, and it's almost considered a negative, I feel like, to some people, to show or to be nervous. And I'm not talking about fumbling and shaking and, you know, tripping over yourself nervous, but
right.
Just to have some humanity to it. And you know, it almost seems like now there's a new breed of mindset, any generation, of just sort of this "I got this" and yeah, I'm fine.
Well, I think in a lot of people's work that I see these days that are kind of up and coming, there's a bunch of stuff that they don't know that they don't know. So they've got what they think is required, but if you're going to take it to a higher art form, there's a lot more that you need to know in order to get there. But I think it's a combination. You've got to have that. You got to have that attitude that, you know, I can do this. It's going to be great. But you've also got to have the, you know, you've got to know realistically what your problems are going to be, and to do everything that you can to overcome those. So I think it's a combination of the two things, you know.
Who was the first legendary director that you worked with, and what was that like for you? Was it Stanley Kubrick?
It was Stanley Kubrick, and you know, having seen all his early movies that I was exposed to by my father, he used to take me up to the National Film Theatre in London, and all the great directors of that time had films that were shown there. But the guy that really stood out to me was Stanley Kubrick. So to be working for him was really an amazing experience. And I don't know how that happened, but working for Stanley is probably the most informative experience I've had as a filmmaker. And to have it happen so early in my career, really, I feel very blessed.
Who was the second legendary director? So you had this dream essentially fulfilled. You probably didn't realize what an opportunity it was. Maybe you did at 19. Maybe you thought this was going to happen all the time. I don't know.
Well, I think after 2001, you know, it was a shock to come into the regular film industry, because I thought, oh, all movies are like this, you know, which was like a 2.5-year experience working in an environment with my favorite director ever, sitting in dailies with him, answering to my footage that was being shown on the screen, you know. And so I think that experience of having a really demanding director looking at your work for 2.5 years is, it can't get much worse than that, or better, you know. So the second most, I'm not sure, I worked with John Huston once, not for very long. I shot the first few shots of Pritz's Honor for him. So that was amazing. I worked on the first Star Trek movie, which Robert Wise directed, and I shot the first 5 minutes of that movie. So I think they really rate up there.
Absolutely. When you went back to work or to look for a new job once the Kubrick film ended, the 2001 Space Odyssey ended, then how was that an eye-opener for you, since you probably thought this was going to become a pattern, you were going to be working on big sets continuously after that point, maybe?
Yeah, no, I left 2001 and went to the premiere in 1968, I think it was. And I had hoped that I would go on all of the other special effects crews went onto a picture called Battle of Britain, which was being shot at Pinewood Studios. And I was not invited to that party. So, because really I was like Doug Trumbull's guy, and Doug left and went to the States. So, so I found the British film industry to be very cliquey, and it's very you have to kind of like nurture your group there, But I loved coming to America because it's like people actually want you to succeed here, So no offense, Britain, but it's a little different.
Maybe it's changed now.
Yes, hopefully.
So you came to wild and crazy California.
Yeah.
Had Easy Rider come out yet, or was it?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay.
I came over here to work on a picture called Zabriskie Point, which was an Antonioni movie, and Antonioni was another one of my favorite directors. He did a picture called Blow Up, which was like a huge revelation in terms of movie making to me, and I just love that movie. And it's about a very fashionable London still photographer that he's shooting some shots, and he takes the stuff back to his darkroom and starts blowing up all the things, and he realizes he's witnessed a murder that happens on film, so he blows up the pictures bigger and bigger, and it's a fascinating movie. But yes, so I'm working for him on a picture called Zabriskie Point, and basically at the end of the movie, the whole world blows up. And so we shot a sequence which was supposedly Los Angeles blowing up. So we went out to the desert, to Rosamond Dry Lake, and we let off thousands of pounds of napalm with high-speed cameras and shot these explosions at night. And we did this matte shot, and we put them into this matte shot, and it was never used in the movie. But then 12 years later, Doug found this footage in the cans that he'd been working on, and Ridley Scott was looking for a snappy opening to his movie Blade Runner, and so they used our explosions that we'd done in that opening scene in Blade Runner, where you're flying over Los Angeles and all these mushroom clouds of fire are going off. So it got used in the end.
Did you get to go to the premiere of Blade Runner?
I didn't.
Oh, I was going to see.
No, and it's never been on my resume, but I guess it could be.
Oh, okay. I was wondering if you had met Philip K. Dick. I think that was his last sort of.
No, unfortunately not.
Okay, interesting. What do you think makes a great director?
Well, for the longest time, I was trying to discern what that was. I think because if you go on a set, the kind of sets that I like, you see everybody working, and the AD's like shouting out all the instructions and doing this and that, and the whole movie is really taking place in the director's head. So for me to go on a set and see what the director's process is almost impossible, because if he's done his job right, then he's cast the actors and he's cast the crew. And when he gets to the set, except for like steering the ship a little bit this way or a little bit that way, there shouldn't really be anything for him to do, you know? He should be able to sit back and let all these building blocks that he's put together to come like before that camera that day, to let that happen. Now, there are a lot of directors that's not their style, you know? And also when I always seem to get myself involved in projects that I don't have enough time for. So time becomes and then I have to be very proactive and like, okay, the camera's coming here, the actors, you know, so you can, on those kind of movies, you can tell who the director is. But my impression on going on set with some of the great directors is that you can't really see what their process is. It's so yeah, it's really hard to know what people's process is except by the quality of their product, you know.
What do you think of the cliche that some directors are afraid of actors? Do you think that's really true? Or do you think that some people just operate better sort of being removed and letting them do their thing, and it gives the appearance of fear?
Well, you know, it's funny because Kubrick has a reputation of not really. Someone said, I think, that if he was a CGI animator, he'd be able to control every aspect of his movie, you know, because you're doing it all pixel by pixel. But and I think some of his best movie performances that he got were from an actor called Peter Sellers, and I'm sure he was an actor that you could just like wind up and start shooting, and you know, the performance is there. I think a lot of inexperienced directors are afraid of the star power of the actors that they're working with, so they don't quite know how to deal with that. And I think a lot of star power actors working with those directors are saying, "I'm not really getting enough from you as a director, so I want to be directed," you know. So I think there's a lot of layers going on there, you know. But if you are afraid of your actors, that's not a helpful place to be, because those actors are your movie, you know. And I don't like to give actors direction. I like that, you know, I've cast them, I've seen them in the thing, and I sit back and I want to see their performance. Now, if there's something that's not working for me story-wise, or you know, but I'll never sit back in the chair and yell at the actor, "Hey, why don't you do it this way?" You know, so you know, for me, direction is I'll get up out of my chair, I'll go into the set, take the actor to one side, and we'll have a very personal conversation about it. So. Actors are your movie, you know.
What's the most important part of the cinematographer's job?
I think the most important part for a cinematographer is his relationship with the director. And basically, as a cinematographer, you are there to facilitate the director's dream. So, you know, I think it's very important to have a point of view that you bring to it. In other words, you've read the script, you see the movie in a certain way. One of the first things I like to do with a director that I'm about to work with is to get in a screening room and watch some of the movies that we think are like relevant to the one that we're doing, or his favorite movies. And I bring the same thing to the party, so that we watch other movies, and we come to a symbiosis of the way we're going to treat the material. Because very often on the set, everything's moving so fast that you can't have that kind of artistic collaboration. Because because the actors are out there and you got to light it, and you got someone screaming at you. You've been lighting that for 7.5 minutes. Come on, we gotta go. So in the heat of battle, you can't necessarily have the kind of collaboration that you would like, but you need to have set that up ahead of time, and that is your job, is to bring a visual flair to the story, but at the same time, you're there to facilitate the director's vision.
Speaking of battle, we hear sometimes that a cinematographer and a director will clash, and the cinematographer will say, I need this isn't going to work. Both have a different agenda. What advice would you recommend to new directors if they're in that spot, and how do they take it away from the set? I realize at times it's going to be chaos, you're not going to be able to fight it, and you probably don't want to do it in front of a crew. But if faced with that dilemma, which we've definitely heard from a lot of people, or just a clashing, how do you take that away from the set and just try to make it through the entire production?
Well, there was a reason that you were chosen in the first place. So there must be, unless you're a new director and the studio said, hey, we're going to put this old-time cinematographer on your show, and he's going to make sure that you finished it in 21 days. So there is that, and that's very hard for a young director to work with. But let's assume that's not happening, and a director's chosen you, and you're working on his project, and something does blow up. That's exactly what you do, is you just take a moment and say, hey, let's take this outside, and you have whatever that discussion is going to be away from the set, because public airing of grievances has no place on a set for me.
Sure. And last question in the same vein, someone left a comment which I thought was interesting, and they said, if you are either a DP or a director, make sure you have some people in your own camp on set with you, so that the production doesn't run away to somebody else's side and everybody kind of turns. So do you have a core set of people you always like to work with? Not just for that possible problem, but it was something I had never thought of, never having been in that situation. But they said to always have some people, quote, in your own camp, because things could quickly turn, and then somehow the production gets away from one of the two.
Well, I'd say earlier in my career, I lost jobs because I didn't have that core crew. And, the producer wanted to hire somebody that had his gaffer and, everybody in place, and they were a well-oiled machine that could come to work on his picture, Working for years and years as a commercial director cameraman, I had a different kind of, most commercial directors, they're with a company, and every time they go out, they use exactly the same people. I had a slightly different business model in that I was a freelance director. So I would go out to like regional advertising, and I'd go to a new city and I'd have to put a whole production together from scratch. And in that situation, I used to maybe only be able to take like one guy with me. And, but I didn't always get that one guy, but I think it is really important, And I actually used to take my key grip, which people thought was unusual. People would always think, oh, he's going to take his gaffer, or this, because, and I renamed him from key grip to crew chief, which is a motor racing term. And it's really the guy that runs the whole physical operation. And he used to work for me in that area, and that would let me deal with the agency and the actors and the cinema. So I think crew members are very, very important, that you have that shorthand with that person, that you can get things done very quickly, And time is the enemy, So.
Is it almost like being in war?
Well, I think it's much more pleasant, you know? I would imagine. But it is, you know, there's a lot of money at stake. And, you know, showing up is the first rule. So being on time on a set is my number one rule. And I probably got that from being so arrogant about it when I was a kid, you know. But because, you know, from the moment you arrive on a set, the clock is ticking, and I hear the dollar bills dropping, you know.
Sure.
And so I think it's a strategy that in other words, you have to have a battle plan to go into your day's shoot. And you have to have everything worked out to the nth degree. In other words, when I do a schedule, it's, you know, it's every 10 minutes. So 10 minutes in, I'm doing this, 10 minutes, you know. So, because I often get to other people's sets and people are like, they're in the makeup trailer and they're having their cup of coffee and, you know, and nothing's happening, you know. So for me, the very first thing that you do is you get the actors out on the set and you block the first scene. They're not, I don't care if they're in makeup or what, but the moment they arrive on the set, we block the first scene. So it's very important to have that battle plan to work with, but then you've got to be prepared to completely throw that away if either creativity or necessity takes you off in another direction. So you've always got to have a plan B, and you've always got to be able to punt if things go in a different direction. So be totally prepared, and then be prepared to give it all up, you know.
Is reacting to an image a DP's only concern while they're on set, once the director yells action?
Well, once the director yells action, the die is cast, you know, so whatever you brought together, but the DP's function is, I would say it was 50% carrying out the vision of the director, and 50% management of like the toys that he has and the people that he has, and how to get it done. So you know, there's a fast way to light a set and there's a slow way to light a set, and you know, the reality is that you're going to be in between, you know. So I would say that's the only time when the image is the only thing a DP has to worry about, is when the director yells action, because then there's nothing else to do, because you've done everything else that you were there to do, and it's all to bring you to that moment when he says action. So you're bringing everything to a nexus at that point, and then the movie's being made. So.
You came to the States from the UK 68?
Yeah, I came in 68.
Do you think the film industry, despite technical changes, is very similar here in the US? I know you came from what you thought was maybe more of a closed network system, and then you come to this wild and crazy town, and there's music, there's all sorts of, you know, different landmark things happening at that time. But in some sense, would you say that the film industry has not changed, or is it different?
I don't think it's changed at all, you know, because the business is about telling stories. That's the bottom line. And the art of storytelling, I guess it's made advances because there are different tools available. There's a wider range, or there's a wider array of tools to let you tell more expansive stories. You know, in other words, you know, with the advent of CG animation, you can anything that you can think of, you can put up there on the screen. So it's changed technically, but the bottom line is that telling a good story and what that good story is virtually unchanged.
What about how one breaks into the industry?
I think it's much tougher for kids now to break into the industry. You know, when I got hired on 2001, there was virtually no one else you know, I happened to be this kid that had done an apprenticeship in animation camera work, and I was not actually working for the original company I'd worked for, but I was off shooting and animating for another guy. But Doug had come to this original company, and one of the guys there had like called me and said they're looking for, you know, if you had a job in England at a company, you were kind of a lifer there, you know. It's like you didn't take a few months off to go and shoot freelance for 2 or 3 months on a live action movie. You did if that's what you did. If you were a live action person, they were freelance. But in the animation business, people weren't freelance. They were kind of lifetime employees with the company, or they would move from animation company to long-term jobs. So, so it was very easy for me to, you know, I don't know how effortlessly it was, whether it was because I had long hair that I was hired, but you know, it didn't seem that hard. And then, as time goes by, you know, I think your resume builds your next gig. So, but people breaking in today, I think it's much, much harder. Because the number of people that have visual arts degrees is like, I mean, that's, you know, half the people in university, I think, have that these days, you know. I mean, it's like, it's just a huge area, and there really aren't enough jobs to go around for those people. But there again, Netflix and all the other streaming companies, there's so much product being made that's a big equalizer. So there's a lot of work out there, much more than there was when I started. But getting that work is like, you know, the competition for that work is much, much greater now.
When you came to Los Angeles, what was one of the first things you did to try to land another job?
Well, I came to Los Angeles with a job.
That's right, sorry, Mr. Trumbull. Yeah.
So I was actually, Doug had told me that, oh, I've got this great future for you in this little black room in here, and you know, kind of like, oh, really? I don't really want to be in that black room, you know? So, you know, there were people that would come into Doug's studio that were working on very interesting projects, you know, and I got to meet those people as they came in, and it wasn't long before, oh, Bruce can shoot, you know, I've got a little project here, you know, and you know, I kept working on all my, you know, I kept working so that when I got that break, I was always ready for it because I had done the homework, you know, and kept doing that, and then things, you know, it always seemed like, you know, I look back on my career and people say, oh, God, 2001, Star Wars, Tron, you know, all these groundbreaking movies. It seems like I've had this incredible run, and I have, but at the end of each one, it just seemed like I was looking for work, and, you know, it didn't seem that easy to do that, but the resume helps you build that, you know.
Do cinematographers care about story structure?
I have to say that in the early part of my career, I did not. And that was a big mistake. I think my career could have been a lot better if I had been more in touch with the structure of the story. All my career, I've been working in the background on my writing career. And so from the very early 80s, I've been writing screenplays and studying screenplays, and my work got better and better as I was able to put together story structure with cinematography, you know. The other place that I learned a lot about cinematography was when I became an editor, and I was in the editing room, because as a cinematographer, you think when you turn the camera on to when you turn it off, that everything's got to be perfect in that one shot, and that's what you're going for. And you say, oh, well, we missed that little bit here, and and the reality is when that shot gets to the editing room, they're only going to use that little piece of it. So you can say that take has some really good things in it, so we definitely print that one, even though it wasn't a perfect take. And the downside of that is that then sometimes you see a really bad camera move being ending up in the movie, but at the same time, it's much better for the story and for the filmmaker. So I think having those parallel disciplines coming together has made me better in all those areas. Being a cinematographer has made me a much better writer than I would be, or director, So everything builds on itself,
What were some of the first screenplays you really dissected once you got to LA and you were working, but you were doing this on the side, which was sort of this parallel talent? Because one seems more action-driven, the other one is more internal, maybe not?
Yeah, no, I think so. I read some of my early screenplay works, and they're completely without that. I mean, I think the great thing about screenwriting for me is there are some massive, hard and fast rules of writing screenplays. But at the same time, within that, you have this infinite freedom. And it's really the structure of it that gives you that freedom. So yes, there are rules, but there's this massive, you don't drive between the lines when you're writing, So the writing process, I'm trying to remember what screenplays I really enjoy. I think the first screenplay that I really looked at and said, this is a great screenplay, is Network, Paddy Chayefsky, and also The Verdict is a fantastic screenplay to me. And there are a lot more now because I really enjoy reading screenplays, And I'm just becoming a member of a group where we take a current screenplay and kind of break it down as writers and filmmakers. So that's a very interesting process for me, which I really enjoy.
So just as you had done lighting on your own and people complimented you on using this natural light, but then you went and learned the formal way, and then it felt maybe overproduced, and then you had freedom to kind of play within that. That sounds like what you've done with the writing.
It's exactly the same process with the writing, yeah, you're right.
When you're hired as a cinematographer, how many times will you read the screenplay for the film you're going to work on?
Well, as I say, in my early career, not enough times, Now, the only time that you really get to read a screenplay is the first time you read it. And I think that goes for being a director or helping somebody else. You only get one fresh read, so you're only seeing the movie continuously once to be surprised by anything that goes on. So that initial time that you read the script is the most important, and it should be without a break. You should never, I think my acting teacher, Nina Foch, told me that whenever you get a script, all the way through, if you don't have enough time that you can sit down and read the whole thing, you shouldn't start it. So I think that's initially that. The thing is that after the third time that you read it, then now it's starting to become really technical, because you're starting to see the script in terms of the schedule, in terms of the locations where you're going to do it. So at some point, the breakdown becomes the Bible that you're working off more than the script. So There's a flow into, that first fresh read, which is the most important, to going into the schedule and the breakdown, and seeing what it's going to take to physically get the production done.
Why did Nina, your acting teacher, recommend that you, if you're going to read the script, you do it in one full sitting, that you don't take breaks, that you're not sending an email, texting?
I think, when you sit in a cinema and you watch the movie, that's how you're going to experience it. And very often if you stop in a script and you pick it up, you'll say, oh, there must have been a day break in there. And you say, oh no, the script happens over 24 hours. So, I think it messes with your sense of time that you're reading it. And it also takes away from the script is going to be performed in 1 hour and a half, 2 hour piece. And that's how you should experience it. And experience it the first time, because you're never going to get that first read ever again. And that's why if I'm writing something and I want to get a reaction from somebody, I'll be very careful about who I show it to at what stage. So I might be getting pretty close to something, and I've got a writer friend that knows how to read something in a rougher state, and I might show it to them. But if I want to get I'll never be able to, I won't be able to use him again, because next time he reads it, he won't be reading it for the first time. So he'll have a different reaction. Now, it doesn't mean that the feedback won't be useful, but it'll never be that first fresh read, which I think is so important.
How many acting classes have you taken?
I don't know. I did a whole session with Nina Foch. I've done some commercial acting classes, which were very interesting, because commercial storytelling is like, 1.3 seconds is the units of time that you're working on a little particular thing, and the production value that you can put into that very short amount of time. It's a very, very interesting discipline. I think from there, so I think 3 or 4 different acting classes. I took some improv classes, and then I kind of went into more. I started directing with more different people, which I'm headed more there than I am to acting. So.
And where was this?
The
classes with Nina Foch?
They were in a rehearsal studio above a bike shop on Melrose Avenue in Hollywood. She had a nice little class there.
Do you have an internal checklist when you're reading a script before a film?
As a director?
As a cinematographer?
As a cinematographer. No. I try to read the script without thinking about anything and just experience the script. Now, as I say, in the technical process later on, then the stuff. But basically, by that time, I'm usually working off the location list and the breakdown, whether it's day or night, and it becomes a much more technical process. But when I first read the script, I try to be the audience and just sit back and enjoy it.
So then, are there certain things that within each scene you have to sort of tick off in your own mind? Like a checklist broken down to each scene? Once you've gotten through the actual sitting down, reading the script as like the audience would experience it, now there's like a list of requirements for each scene, technically, that you're checking off?
No, I don't really work that way. I have to say that people draw storyboards, they do little diagrams of how they want it to, they do little thumbnails, but until you get the actors onto the set and they block the scene, because it's fine. Oh, well, in the storyboard, you're over here at, De Niro is saying, no, I'm not standing over here, I'm going to be right here, you know. So the blocking of the scene that to me is when the scene comes alive and when my work can really start. Because without seeing where the actors are going to be, you know, lighting is very actor specific. You know, you can light generally, but if you want to do something very moody and special, you really need to see where they're going to be working. And until you get onto that set and see where that is, and that's not until the director first puts a scene together, you know, and working with directors, I would say 2/3 of them don't know how they're going to block it before they get the actors onto the set. Others have very specific ideas, well, we're going to do it over here, and you know. But the blocking process is where the day's work begins for me, you know. And checklists, not really. That's a little too mechanical. You know, there are some shoots that are so tight that I have to order equipment that I need for that day, just specifically for that one shot, and you've got to do that. But you know, it's if you're making a movie, you don't want to say, oh well, we don't have any dolly shots today, so we're not going to rent a dolly. You know, there are some things that are going to be part of your package, and you're going to have, and they become the repertoire that you use to be creative and spontaneous. But then there are other times when, you know, equipment is going to be so expensive or the budget's so tight that you're going to have to say, I'm going to use this on this day, and then you get very shot specific about what kind of equipment you're going to use in a certain place and what kind of lighting equipment you're going to use in a certain place.
So then how did storyboards weave their way into seeming like it's a normal part of production? Is it just for some people? Is it a preference?
Well, I think it helps, storyboards help non-visual directors visualize what they're going to do. But really the birth of storyboards and their greatest use to me is in visual effects sequences, because then you're dealing with a discipline that's so specific to what's going to be in that particular shot and how the sequence is going to work, because there are so many, you know, you can't shoot visual effects like documentary, and you know, it has to be very specific. And at that time, storyboards become the tool to do that. Now, when you do a special effects sequence in a medium to large budget movie now, you have a previs department, and storyboards have become now fully animated sequences that are done ahead of time, and then you're kind of like executing an engineered movie in terms of what you're going to need to bring to a particular frame and shoot it a particular way to get the movie made, you know. So a lot of directors don't really like that process, because their freedom of blocking a scene kind of goes away. So I'm glad to say that in visual effects now, there are a lot of tools that are being developed, like virtual camera systems, which are putting that creativity back in the director's hands about being able to be much more spontaneous about how things are going to be done. I saw something about Rogue One recently, and their animated battle sequence is actually shot by the director with a handheld virtual camera. So he was able to use that to be very creative and spontaneous about the way he covered like a fully animated battle sequence.
Do you remember where you were when you learned of Stanley Kubrick's passing, and how did it make you look at the life of a career?
Well, it was kind of full circle with Stanley, because I hadn't seen Doug Trumbull for many years, And I happened to be working in his studio in the Berkshires the day that I heard that Stanley died. And I was working on a very kind of high-tech virtual set that combined puppetry with CG images. So that the puppets were shot with a virtual camera, and wherever the camera was driving a computer which showed you where you were in this three-dimensional reality. So it was a brand new technology that Doug had kind of pioneered, and I was up there seeing him, and we both got the news together. So it was very sad. So Doug then left and went to the funeral, but I was on this job, so I was not able to do the same thing. So.
Sure. Did it make you look at all great careers have some pushback, or, you know, like you can't be an auteur without having extreme criticism in one direction or the other? That's part of the journey that's going to happen?
Oh, yes, I think so. That goes so much with the territory of being an artist, you know, is that they're going to be the haters and they're going to be the lovers, you know. So, but I had wondered at the time, because it was so close to the end of Eyed Wide Shut, that I didn't know whether he'd actually finished the picture or not, because it hadn't been released yet when he died, and it wasn't going to be for a little while, so I wondered whether he had actually finished the film, but I believe he had, and maybe that was the sense of completion that he did, which would have been a lot better than dying in the middle of a project, you know. So that was, yeah, I felt good. I felt a life well lived, you know.
Why did you write Lost Fair?
Well, I co-wrote Lost Fair. I had actually found a story on Virtual Pitch Fest, which is I'm a producer member of that. It's an online thing where people pitch to me, the producer. So they'll look through the people that they can pitch to, and they'll kind of pick different people that they like their resumes, or they like what they've done in the past, and they'll choose you specifically to pitch their project to. And then you read the one-page pitch, and if you like it, you go ahead and read the screenplay. So it's a good project for writers. Virtual Pitch Fest, very good. So I found the project there, and I'd been looking for something that I thought that I could produce at a price. And even though it had kids in it, and it was kind of a road movie, and there were things that I mean, first of all, I loved the premise, I loved the characters, and I loved some of the dialogue, but it wasn't really in a full screenplay form. For instance, the main bad guy in the movie, he was talked about in the original script, but he wasn't a character in the movie. So there were certain formal things and structural things that needed to be done to the script. So that's why I got involved writing with Rachel Ray, who originally pitched me on the project.
When you found the pitch on Virtual Pitch Fest, what was it that stood out to you?
Not the first time I've been asked that question, and it's very hard to say. It spoke to me, and I think that's the greatest reason to make a movie, is when something really speaks to you. And it was about this 11-year-old girl, and who had muscular dystrophy, so she was crippled, and she was not expected to live more than a year or so during the time that the movie was made. And she had been sold by her mother. And so it was a very dark story, but it also had very kind of metaphysical elements in the story. So it was, I've been meditating and studying Western esoteric philosophy for many years. And there's a thing about, people think, oh, I've got to reach higher consciousness. But I don't, that's not enough. You've got to spherically expand your consciousness. So you're reaching down into the depths as much as you're reaching for the height and the breadth of it. And so spherically, this movie was very dark and very light at the same time. And I think it was elements of that I saw in the initial pitch that really attracted me to it.
So you contacted Rachel, or through the website you contacted?
Through the website, I contacted Rachel, and she she sent me the script, and then somehow she got my contact information off the web, which is not hard to do, but so she started calling me, and she just she ravaged me with phone calls, and so and I thought, gosh, so she was very tenacious, and I said, well, the chances of us getting this made as a movie, are like 100 to 1, because that's the way the movies are, So are you prepared to go on that journey with me? And she was. And so together we started whipping the script into shape and developing characters and making it a makeable movie. And the next problem that I had was that I had an 11-year-old that was in every scene of a movie that needed to carry the movie. So I decided that I wasn't going to make the movie unless I found that 11-year-old girl. So I found Alexis Rosinski, and she is an amazing little actress. Not so little anymore. Time goes by. And once I found her, then I decided to greenlight the movie. And I was in a position to greenlight the movie because I was financing the movie, which is breaking the golden rule of cinema, which is never use your own money. But I loved the project so much, and I was so into it that I decided to do that.
And Rachel, the writer that you co-wrote it with, is she based in LA?
No, and I never met Rachel until sometime after the movie. So we wrote together remotely, and she's in a wheelchair, and she lives in Victoria, Colombia. And I had a very nice visit with her a few months ago. I went up to visit her and got to meet her for the first time. But it's basically the story of her, the true story of her childhood. So it was pretty emotional, to meet her.
Ah, so hence why she was so tenacious about it.
Yes, and it was funny because she had followed my career. She said while her and her brother were being abused by her parents, her escape was into the movies. And so she knew of me through those early credits. And it was weird. And not only that, when she made the pitch, she made a mistake. She wasn't originally going to pitch it to me. She was going to pitch it because she didn't think it was my cup of tea. So she was going to pitch it to somebody else. So the pitch came to me without her really targeting me. So I guess it was meant to happen,
Did you outline the screenplay for Lost Fair?
Well, there was an outline of what was going to happen in the original pitch that was presented to me. The physical act of outlining, no, not in the sense that I never got the 4x5 cards and pinned them up on the wall and reordered them, and so I never approached the structure in that way. It came across much more organically than that. I in fact I worked giving notes to Rachel, and she did 3 drafts. So she said the draft that I'd given her was kind of was kind of the whitewashed version. I said, give me your grittiest version that you have. And then she did 2 more drafts after that. And although they were good, but they went completely in a different direction. So I was trying to focus in a particular direction, and stuff was getting wilder and wilder, and that's when I decided to come in and start structuring. So I did a draft that was based on 3 different drafts that she had done, and then honed it down. Then I gave it to some writer friends of mine. When I'm in doubt about structure, they're very good because they're, once again, you can read. I think the only people that can't really see the structure of a screenplay are the people that are writing it, you know. It's that you can be as erudite as you want about like criticizing other people. So, oh, well, this is no, you know, page 5, this should have happened, and, you know. But you just, somehow when you're writing yourself, all that objectivity goes away. So it's very important to me to have a cadre of people that I go to you know, help me, ground me in a project, you know. And I'm lucky to have met those people in my journey of writing, you know.
How was the dialogue when you first read it?
The dialogue was one of the things that attracted me to it very much, and there's a lot of the original dialogue in the script. Now, the stuff that I added, but I tried to keep it in the same voices of those characters. For instance, she has an imaginary friend in the movie that she speaks to who becomes a character in the movie, and a lot of the dialogue between her and her imaginary friend is completely untouched from the original version. So I loved her dialogue, you know, and I tried to keep it as intact. Obviously, it has to change when you change the structure and the overall thing, and there are new scenes. But I tried to keep everything as original as possible, because once again, when I read that pitch, that's the freshest and best it's ever going to be, you know. You know, after that, you're not objective on, because you've read it once, all your objectivity has gone away. In other words, now you have to start looking at the story logically in terms of structure, but that first emotional feeling that you get from the script, you'll never have that beyond the first read.
So there were 3 versions, it sounds like, that you looked at, the original, and someone said it was too vanilla, and then a gritty version, and then... Well,
no, I said, she said that she had rewritten it several times, you know. And I said, well, is this the grittiest version that I'm reading? She said, no, I put this version out because people had told me, people that she'd shown the project to before had said, no, this is too dark. I'm not going to be able to make this, you know. But here I was asking her for her darkest version of it, you know. And it's the darkness combined with the light and metaphysical that I found so interesting about the project, because it's very dark and very hopeful at the same time. So.
Do you think if you hadn't been studying, you said Western, not Buddha, I'm sorry.
Esoteric philosophy.
Okay.
I say that because then it's not religious.
Okay, oh sure, non-denominational, yeah.
Right, non-denominational.
If you hadn't been studying these different types of philosophy, would you be attracted to something that would be maybe considered very dark by some viewers?
I probably would have veered away from it, I would think. And I think it's only, but you know, that whole training in that particular discipline is life-changing anyway, so who knows who I would have been as a person without having done that, you know. But so I'm really a believer in the fact that you are exactly where you need to be, and everything that's happening in your life is for the perfect reason, and nothing happens by accident. So that's my philosophy. So I don't think I think I would have been attracted to the story, but who knows, because I was who I was when I read it.
Where does the movie stand now?
Well, I think we're just coming up to 10,000 streaming minutes on Amazon, so I think that's good. But I don't really know. Our distributors they're great. They've got us into a lot of different places, but they don't give me a lot of information about on a daily basis how it's doing. But they'll send me Amazon things on a monthly basis so I can see how it's performing. But I don't have any other information about any of the other platforms that it's running on, because it's on about 6 different platforms. So I would say the movie's doing really well, and Indie Rights, who is our producer, they're very happy with the movie. It's their best grossing movie on Amazon. So I think the movie's doing well.
What's been the feedback from like the verified rentals, or I don't know?
Just really that Amazon number, that 10 million streaming minutes. I don't know what that means in terms of how many people watch the movie. I know you get paid by the minute that it's streamed. Mm-hmm. So, and the pay scale changes. If you do well and your numbers are up, you get paid more on the next month or so, or 3 months. So financially, I don't know how the movie is doing yet, but it looks like it's doing well.
How did you teach yourself the craft of screenwriting?
Well, like everything else in my life, I just started doing it, and I look back on some of my earlier efforts, and oh gosh, that's abysmal, It's tough. I read a lot of books, read all the required Truby. I think the book that I enjoyed best was Dramatic Screenwriting by Lego Segre. And it's actually a book about playwriting. But I got a lot out of that book in terms of he has a thing that he calls static conflict. And a lot of stuff that I wrote had static conflict in it, and you have to have rising conflict, so the conflict's going to come out of your characters, but if that doesn't move, that conflict doesn't grow and complicate, then it's just static conflict is, you say, oh well, my script's got conflict in it. Yeah, well it does, but the conflict isn't moving. So that was a very important lesson that I learned from that particular book on screenwriting, playwriting.
Were there parts then that you went back in and said, yes, there might be an argument scene here, but it's not moving the story forward? How can I?
You mean on a specific script that I?
For Lost Fair. Mm-hmm.
Oh, for Lost Fair.
So
I think I wrote Lost Fair more instinctually than, I think you kind of internalize the rules that you learn. And, I will look at a script and I get to page 30 and I say, well, have I got to the first turning point? Or, I'll read 10 pages and say, do I know really what's going on here? Have I been set in motion? But I think when I'm writing myself, I try not to use those rules. I will come back and look at it after I've done the writing work. But I try to let the rules kind of like be part of the language that's working in the background rather than try to follow them as I'm writing, and I try to write from the heart. as the process of actually putting the words down on paper, you know. The other thing I find about writing is that I find the muse does not visit me until I'm in the act of typing. And, you know, I can go on, you know, it's fine, I can go on a hike and I can think about the characters and, you know, but nothing creative really happens until I'm actually physically in the act of writing. That's just, I don't know if that's true for anybody else, but it's true for me.
So did you set times for yourselves? I mean, if she's sending you one draft or different notes or different things, is there a specific time you're working on it?
You mean time of day?
Yeah, like a time and day, place. Did you really have to hunker down and say, I need to be more disciplined because now this isn't just someone's script, it's also their life and their life story?
I don't know. I think writing is like painting for me. I get completely lost in it. So for me, there's not a particular time of day. I don't have to, you know, some people like to write late at night because the internal edit gets smoothed out. I don't know whether it's because they've had a couple of drinks or not, but some people like to write then. But for me, there's no time of day, there's no place. It's completely, you know, the energy and the love of the project is what like drives me to it. So it's never a chore to come and sit down. It's, oh, where was I? You know, it's like, for me, it's just an innate energy that happens, you know.
Was there any pushback with you also being the director? So co-writer, producer, and now directing Lost Fair?
No, I think, you know, it was a given. In other words, this whole project is coming together for me to make this movie. I'd had, in the previous 2 years, I'd had 3 projects that came to within 2 weeks of commencement of principal photography, only to have the financing pulled or to, you know, and when you're that close, you've already made the movie. You've broken down the script, you've cast it, you've done all this stuff, and so it's like a miscarriage. You know, I mean, it's so awful. And I decided I wasn't going to let this happen this next time. I was going to make my own movie, and Lost Fair was the perfect vehicle for it.
Were there times where you would wake up in the middle of the night and say, am I really doing this? Or it was just, I know this is the right time for me, especially this new mindset I'm adopting or whatever?
Yes, I think you wake up in a cold sweat, you know, am I really going to do this, you know? And even there was a time where it was the first day of shooting, and we were shooting some car sequences, and Alexis was in the front seat of the cab, and her mom came and said, where do we disable she's not going to get in the cab unless we disable the airbags, you know? And this is an older car and you can't disable the airbags, so you know, it would have taken a mechanic to come, you know. And if I said, okay, I'm not making the movie. So even on the first day of principal photography, there was a chance to pull back, you know, and not do it. But that didn't happen. So because when I finished the script and I told Elliot Rosenblatt, my co-producer, how much I wanted to spend on the movie or how much I could spend on the movie, he said, well, all right, I can make that stretch to 11 days. So I thought, 11 days? I've made some 18-day movies, and I thought that was about as fast as you could make a movie. So 11 days was, you know, when you're on that schedule, nothing can go wrong. So it really, I mean, the planning of it and how it works needs to be down to the 15-minute segment, you know. And, you know, so it's probably an ogre trying to get that done. So if I had pushback, it was probably because I was like so moving ahead and blindly moving ahead. Not blindly, but just focused on where we were going, you know.
Did you have to have a tutor on set?
Yes, yes.
So 13 days, tutor on set.
11 days.
11 days, I'm sorry, okay.
And tutor on the set, and we're making a road movie. So that means that, you know, we have car photography inside the cars, which is very time consuming. You know, normally you get a car and you put it on a process trailer and then you light it and then you've got certain angles and then you tow the car. You know, I got these two Canon XC10s and suction cup mounts, and I just put them on the windows and just said, okay, go driving and do the scene. So I never really got to see those car scenes except when they came back, and usually I didn't have time to like rewind the footage, and I had to rely on the actors and say, did you get it? You know, yeah, we got it, you know. But I would have them do the scene maybe 3 times, so at least I had some choices with it, you know. So, yeah, pretty grueling, the schedule, you know.
Is this your first feature directing credit?
It's the first movie that I've been so involved in. I shot a picture for Roger Corman in the 80s called Vendetta, which is a women in prison movie. Kind of a cult classic. It's got a pretty good rating on IMDb, but this was the first, as an auteur, this is the first project that I'd done, yeah.
Do you plan another?
I do. I have a project called Garden Country, and it's about a Marine pilot, and she tries to go through the justice system, and it fails her, and she takes matters into her own hands. So.
Timely.
Another tough story.
Yeah,
You know?
and a timely one
A timely
at
one,
that.
indeed.
Wow. You seem to be drawn to female protagonists?
I do. What's that about?
I don't know, yeah.
Before it was fashionable. Now it's almost a requirement if you're going to make an action movie. You've got to have a female hero. But when I was developing those other projects, it was not.
Except for Norma Ray, I guess.
Well, yeah.
Back in the day.
There've been exceptions to the
There
rule.
have, yeah.
But I pitched Garden Country. I think I've had that project in the back of my mind for a long time. I pitched that to someone and said, "Oh, female protagonists? No, we're not interested." You know.
Did you co-write it? I'm sorry, or you?
Garden Country. I co-wrote with one of my most trusted writing partners. I love to write with partners because you know you're writing dialogue, so that's 2 people back and forth. So it makes sense to me to have 2 people in the room. You know. But it's a tricky relationship, so you can only do it with certain people. But I wrote this with Steve Finley, who I've probably written maybe four different screenplays with over the years. And so it's my original screen story, and we wrote it together. Now, originally, I wanted Steve, not just because I enjoy working with him, but I needed to get this off the press really quickly, because about 4 years ago when I started writing it, there were many documentaries about rape in the military, and I thought this is a topical subject, it's got to happen really quickly, but unfortunately that has legs, the whole situation, and it's worse now than it was when I started writing the story. You know.
At what point in your career did you say, I want to go from being the cinematographer to the director, or was that always a plan?
It was always the plan. I think, as I described when I was talking about my special effects career, and then I spent the early part of my career saying, okay, I've done that. Now I want to move on to this. And I've done that, now I'm going to move on to this. But as I get later in my career, I like to bring all that stuff together. So, stuff that I've done is stuff that I want to do again. So this new project that I have involves visual effects. It's going to be a very strong, I'm sure I'll use a DP, but has a very strong visual sense to it. And, as a director, then the characters are the most important thing to me. So, but yeah, it's always been the plan.
And what about the darkness level of the screenplay? Knowing that it's a very, traumatic topic, how much do you plan to go dark, and how much do you plan to have other parts to it?
Well, I think the screenplay has been in the drawer for a little while, and I showed it to a friend recently, and he was very excited about it. So I reread it, and I'm going, "Hey, this was really good. Who wrote this stuff? This is good." I found the screenplay on rereading it. The darkness is there, but the excitement is there, and the I wouldn't say comedy, but the lightness of the human condition is there. So I wouldn't call it a dark and somber script, although it deals with a very dark subject.
What's been the easiest year for you as a filmmaker?
Last year. I think the tools that are available for filmmakers now, it used to be that to make a movie, you needed this huge infrastructure technically. You needed these cameras, and then you needed the stuff to go to the lab, then you need to bring it back and make a print, and then edit it on a moviola, and cut the negative, and mix it, and all those tools, from the cameras to the editing programs to the VFX software, have all become totally available to everybody, which to me has democratized the whole filmmaking process. And I think it's absolutely fabulous that anyone with a vision and if I don't know how to do something, I watch a YouTube video on how to do it, and I teach myself how to do it. But I guess I've done that my whole career, but now it's so available that, yesterday I'm looking at some budgeting software, so I'm watching some YouTube videos, and it's available, it's out there. So I think it's easier to be a filmmaker now than it ever was.
What's been the most difficult year for you as a filmmaker?
I don't know. All movies are difficult, and usually if a movie is easy and you're really having a good time while you're making it, my experience is it doesn't turn out very well, Now, some projects have been like real nightmares because of some directors, they like to create really negative energy on the set, and they work off the kind of energy of the people that are working for them, that they're consummate professionals, so they dig their heels in and say, "I don't care what he says, I'm going to do a great job." But I don't like creating that kind of energy on a set. To me, projects flow, they flow out of love, and everybody working in the medium that they're loving on a story that they love. And so I've worked with some difficult people, but I try not to be one. Although I have to say, on my last movie, I told my producer, because basically I made it with a bunch of young kids because I had 11 days. They had to have experience, but they couldn't be, my cinematographer, basically I'm doing street theater and I'm covering it with two cameras, either over shoulder both sides or wide and tight from one side and then from the other side. So I'm moving along, I'm pretty tough. So I said to my producer, oh yeah, that one guy in the art department, he didn't like me, you know. And Elliot said, nobody liked you. What are you talking about? You know? So I guess I'm tough, you know.
Well, it's a weird thing when someone's sort of at the helm of the ship.
Yeah.
Because it's easy to find fault, and everybody has different angles for wanting to take somebody down a couple notches or whatever. So everybody's kind of angling.
Right.
Know? And so you can be a politician as much as you want with certain things, but there's always going to be anglers
Right.
in the water, you know.
I agree. And I think when you're making a movie and you're focused on a really tight schedule, it's very, you know, if anything is negative about the process, it's the clock that's ticking, and it's getting the stuff done in the right amount of time. And as the director, that's your greatest ally, and your biggest enemy is the clock. And you can't rely on, you know, you can say, well, the assistant director, he didn't move it along fast enough, or this guy didn't do this, or, you know, the buck stops with you, and you're financing it as well, so boom, you know. I hope it's never that tough again, but it was a very lovely process as well, so.
Why do you think people fail in Hollywood?
I think people fail because they fail to realize how tenacious you have to be. And all the rejection that you get, and this is the hardest for me to say, is like when you get that rejection, you know you're one step closer to the one person that's going to say yes, you know, and you have to go through. So it's 110-1, you know. You have to have 100 meetings and 10 people say yes and one person actually does it. So it's, I think other reasons that people fail are because I've seen a lot of directors that say, I'm the director, you know? And it's like they're not really coming from a place of knowledge and love of the material, or, you know, they're playing the director, you know. And usually when people don't really know what they're doing, they also get very insecure and therefore very mean to people because things aren't going the way they should, and they're looking to play the blame game, you know. I think another reason that I probably haven't gone further is my inability to network as well as I should. I've always found that very difficult. It's very, very hard for me to go into a room and work the room, you know. I do kind of stand in the corner and sip my cappuccino, you know. But I think if I had it to do over again, I would work on that. I also had a big problem with public speaking, which I went to Toastmasters to kind of overcome. And now I do a lot of talks at Comic-Cons and teaching different places in the industry. And that working on that has really allowed me to move forward.
Have you ever thought of what your life would have been like if you hadn't had that opportunity to come to California? And you might have been sort of metaphorically banging your head to get into this closed clique?
Or if I'd stayed in England and worked the system, I guess, you know, it almost seemed to me like it's whoever bought the, you know, you'd go to the bar after work and you had to buy a round of drinks for everybody, and you know, it's very, very transactional there, you know. No, I you know, even before I had the opportunity, I was always going to be in Los Angeles. My mom she had traveled around the world. Her aunts had sent her around the world before she got married, and you know, I had this National Geographic that showed me the Los Angeles Basin, the Disney Studios. Oh, there's Disneyland, 20th Century Fox. You know, I was always going to be here. I don't know, so I don't think the option of staying in England ever would have happened. But I probably would have navigated that system okay, you know, because my passion was to be in the business. You know.
Where does your tenacity come from? Because you sit before us sort of like with a monk-like, you know, resolve, and I don't see like a, you know, you don't like networking, and I see somebody who seems more even-keeled, but where does that tenacity come from with your career?
I don't know, I think it comes, tenacity is not in the moment for me. It's over a much longer period of time. But, you know, my career, it looks like a dream from great project to great project, but in between it always seemed like, you know, never going to work again. You know, how am I going to deal with this? Where's the next job going to come from? You know, the good news is that the resume builds on itself. So that's a good thing. But I think it's just a slow forward movement. You know, this is where I'm going, and you never lose sight of that. But it's not like holding on tight to the moment or to any particular one thing. I mean, there are times to do that, but I think it's just a long, slow process. You know, so but I guess it looks like tenacity. You know.
Do you see, whether from your own family or whatever, just younger people wanting things faster and not wanting to, you know, whether it's children in the business or whatever, just a certain route, whereas before you had to more take your time with it, now everybody wants to jump ahead and do something? Times have changed.
Yes, I do. I think the kids today, I think they have it much harder because even though there's a lot of product being made now, the competition to get that work is much stiffer than it was when I started out. But I do also see the lack of, you know, when it doesn't come quickly, they kind of like move on to something else, you know. And I think it's only by maintaining the focus, you know, and you're going to get knocked down a whole bunch of times, but you just gotta keep going, you know.
Yeah, and you saw your parents were in the industry, is that right? Or at least
Yes.
your dad was, yeah? Uh-huh.
Yeah. My dad worked as staff at the BBC, so I didn't see the kind of competitive aspect of what I needed to go through to have a successful career. I didn't see him tackling those same problems, but I think he definitely gave me the background and the beginning of that knowledge, you know, because I would go to dailies with him, and you know, BBC shows were done half in the studio and half as filmed elements, and they would like combine them, and it was weird because the in-studio stuff was at 60 frames a second, and then they suddenly cut to this 24 frame a second, so it didn't look like the same piece of media at all. But anyway, they did that. But I would watch him. I would go filming with him. I was never in the studio with him, but he would take me on location, and you know, he would look at a strip of film and he said, every picture on there, every picture should be a perfect picture, you know. So even though it was a movie, you know, so the composition's got to be right. So he gave me this whole kind of basis, and I think his ability to work with actors, which he was really known for, you know, and he was known for really good casting. So all those things were achievable to me. It doesn't mean I was good at them when I started, but it was not an impossibility. I could see light at the end of the tunnel, you know.
But at the same time, when you came to California, you knew that little dark room, that you had been offered a quote unquote cush job was
Right.
not for you.
Yes, no, definitely not for me. And you know, going on to the next thing was not necessarily how you build. In other words, I never built a really great DP career. I mean, I had a DP career, and you know, I've worked on some really really great projects. But I think you're taught that you have to focus in a particular area, and I do see if your ambition is to be a great DP, then you really have to focus on that. But mine was not to do that, so I really took a DP career into a commercial directing career, and that way, you know, I must have shot like 300 television commercials, and each one is like a little production. So you're going through that, even though it's for a much shorter period of time. You're going through the casting process, the location process, the equipment process, and the post process. You're going through that many times, you know. So that was a really good training for me. And then, you know, the writing happened on a much slower level, but studying acting and directing while that was going on has brought me to where I am now, you know.
What are some things in the last 5 years you learned that you wish you knew previously?
I have to say it's probably the ability to network and also to cold call companies and not really mind the rejection as much as I used to. So I think it's, you know, I look at my age and say, if you can't make that telephone call now, you're never ever going to be able to make it. So I think it's a more relaxed attitude about what's going to happen. And a lot of the last 5 years have been making this movie, Lost Feb. I would say maybe 3 years of it from the beginning to now, and that's a life dream come true. So I'm feeling really good about stuff now. Yeah.
And why would you be cold calling companies?
To sell the next project. So you got to get past the gatekeepers, you know, that are preventing you from getting to the person that can read your script and say yes to it. Because my next project is not something I can self-finance, so I have to sell it. Got to get it out there, you know.
Do you think people are less apt to say no these days? You just don't hear from them. Do you think before people gave you a clear no or yes? Maybe now nobody wants to hurt anybody's feelings? Everybody's sensitive, so nobody wants to.
It's a bit like when I was in the commercial business, I made a lot of commercials in Japan, and they used to say, well, when you're talking to Japanese companies, you know, it's like yes means maybe, and maybe means no. So I think I don't think people say no to you. Some do very quickly, very professionally. You know, they'll read it right away, and most just like disappear into the ozone, and you never hear from them. So, which is why it's important. You know, earlier in my career, I would like send my script out. Oh, please read my script, and then you'd wait 6 weeks and not hear from them. And you know, so now it's just like 3 companies every day. You know, you just, you know, there's a lot of fish in the sea. You got to just keep going and keep it out there. And I'm a lot better than that, at doing that than I used to be. So.
Do you really think networking helps with success?
Yes. I think people like to make movies with their friends, and they want to be friends, and those are the projects that get made, you know. Other than the whole kind of impenetrable situations that a lot of movies are deals. They're not really like, you know, we think of them as like creative projects, but it's the film industry. So, you know, it's a lot of the big movies that get made, they're deals. They're not creative projects like they used to be in the old studio system. And so I think that's why you see a lot of projects that are not cast well, because we got the script, we got this actor, he's interested, and movies are put together and engineered more than being works of art and love that get made by people. Sad.
Except for some art house cinema that I've seen recently.
Yes.
It's been quite good.
Yeah, no, independent cinema is still alive and well, and actually a lot more alive and well. I have to say Lost Fair goes into that category, you know, and there wouldn't have been an outlet for those movies. This movie would never have got distribution 5 years ago. You know. Would have been very, very difficult. But now with streaming services, once again, it's democratized the whole process. You can make a little movie, and if you make it well, people want to watch it, you know, so that's great.
Did it have theatrical distribution?
It had a week theatrical. Unfortunately, it was supposed to run 3 times a day instead of once a day, and therefore it wasn't eligible for Academy consideration. And the reason that I wanted to do that was because that gives you an opportunity to mail out DVDs and Blu-rays to a lot of people in the industry. So whereas the movie is done well commercially, or is doing well commercially, not that many people inside the business have seen it. So that would have been nicer. So we live and learn, you know.
Tell us about the biggest success you've had in your career.
It's always my next job is the biggest success that I'm going to make it. So I think I've been so lucky throughout my career. It would be very hard to pinpoint one high point. But when I look back on, you know, what I have achieved, I didn't realize what I'd achieved until I started doing Comic-Cons, and people would come up to me and said, "Oh gosh, yes, Star Wars. That's why I got in the business when I saw that movie." Or I've had people come up and say, "Yeah, I saw your movie Tron, and I decided to be a software programmer and this and that." Until you see what, so I would say the big success is the body of work and the influence that it's had on people.
So that sounds like it's something that you're not able to see right away. It's going to take time and then interactions.
Exactly.
Did it make you look at the projects you worked on because you knew how much struggle or whatever was behind it, but then to have someone approach you after you were on a panel or something,
right,
and say that?
Well, it certainly made it all worthwhile, you know, so.
Right. Did you always know you were going to work at higher levels in the industry?
I always aspired to work at higher levels. I didn't know I was going to get what I was aiming for, but I've achieved many of the things that I wanted to. And there'll always be people that are, it's like in racing. There's always somebody faster than you, and there's always somebody slower than you. So it's like you've achieved greatly, but you'll never get there, you know.
I think competition matters less, and maybe after like 35, because there's so much pressure on people to like do this by age, whatever. And it seems like it used to be 40, and now it's 30, and now it's 25. And do you think as time goes on, people let competition go? Because even if they have achieved it, they go, yeah, but was it enjoyable?
Well, for me, it's been enjoyable on every step of the road. You know, I think I think there is that pressure, and I've put pressure on myself to do that. I don't really feel like coming from outside, because people always say, gosh, look what you've done, you know, but for me it's never enough, you know. So that's always what pushes me on to the next thing. So I think competitiveness, I think I competed with myself, you know. I think that's how it works for me, you know. I mean, and of course there are people that, gosh, I wish I'd done that, I wish I'd made that movie, I wish I'd, you know, I wish I was on my 10th or feature grossing or $100 million, you know. But I'm where I am. I'm very content with that now. And so I think as time goes by, you're a little easier on yourself.
Right. Yeah, sometimes I see younger people and they just seem so, I mean, they have to have something no matter what the cost. And I'm just wondering, as society's sped up, they watch their parents lose things during the recession or struggle during the recession,
right.
And then it's become even more like life or death. Sometimes I see that in people.
Well, desperation is not a good feature. It doesn't do, that desperate feeling doesn't do well when you're interviewing for a job. It doesn't do well for yourself while you're trying to achieve something. So yes, I think a lot of people do feel that, but I don't think it's constructive to their careers at all, you know.
Right. I think some people, though, are hardwired to be more competitive than others.
I guess it's the American way, huh? You know?
Maybe, that's true, yeah.